Hello and welcome to Newsline. I'm Nick Tabano.
And I'm Ruby Cairns.
Today on the show, we'll be joined by award-winning novelist Jennifer Down, who'll be chatting to us about her new book, Proud Flesh.
Find out why sugar can leave a nasty taste in your mouth. And we'll be going into the hidden but colourful world of designer snake breeding.
But first, here's what's making news. The Victorian state budget has been released and we'll be crossing live to Bryn Duggan, who is at State Parliament.
Anthony Albanese is set to take over the reins of the ALP. We'll have more with our political respondent, Catherine Smith. The European election is in full swing with the largest turnout in decades. Our international reporter Jessica Boland will give us more later in the show.
Melbourne mourns the death of 25-year-old Courtney Heron, who was found by dog walkers in Royal Park on Saturday morning. A 27-year-old man has been charged over what police describe as a horrendous bashing of the woman. We cross live to Anna McGuinness in Royal Park. What's the latest, Anna?
27-year-old Henry Hammond has been charged with 1 count of murder. He was arrested by police yesterday and charged overnight. He faced the Melbourne Magistrates Court this morning and was remanded in custody. He will remain behind bars until his next court appearance in September.
And Anna, what do we know about the alleged perpetrator?
We know that he was homeless at the time of the attack. In court today, the magistrate ordered a medical assessment after his lawyer said that he may have a delusional disorder. He faced court today with a black eye and bruising on his face. It's reported that he was smiling at people in the public gallery during his hearing.
And what's happening at the scene of the crime?
It's an emotional scene here. Tributes and flowers have been laid throughout the morning at the site here at Royal Park. Miss Heron's body was found just near the logs behind me by dog walkers on Saturday morning. Police have described the attack on Miss Heron as a horrendous bashing that occurred sometime between Friday night and Saturday morning. Police on horseback have been patrolling the area, maintaining a strong security presence at the site.
And has there been any response from political leaders?
Political leaders such as Marise Payne is a new Minister for Women, has said that the safety of women will be a top priority. However, this is not a new issue. 4 women in the last 12 months have been murdered in public places in Melbourne. Just under a year ago, Eurydice Dixon was murdered just 2 kilometres here from the scene in Royal Park. A vigil is planned to be held here on Friday evening at Royal Park, where mourners will commemorate the life of Courtney Heron.
Thanks for that, Anna. The Australian Dental Association has called for the sugar tax to help improve the nation's oral health. Nick Angus reports how the sweet yet savage carbohydrate poses a widespread dental threat, especially to children.
Sugar. It's one of the world's largest phenomenons, and it's not hard to see why. Yet when does too much sugar really become too much? Today, research has proven the overconsumption of sugar found in popular sweets can contribute to multiple health issues. Painful and unpleasant tooth decay is one of them.
Sugar is bad for our teeth if we consume a lot of it, because the bacteria in our mouths will use sugar to create acid that can cause decay in our teeth.
Dr. Deborah Ellsby has seen firsthand the impact of tooth decay, in particular on young children.
Children can present with pain in their teeth, with lost sleep at night, with really bad infections, so really swollen faces. Parents are obviously upset, the children are upset, they lose school days, parents lose work days, and they can actually have to be admitted to hospital.
Yet the statistics associated with tooth decay for young children could prove to be the biggest issue. As a representative of Victorian dentists, Associate Professor Matthew Hopcraft is all too familiar with the severity of these statistics.
What we see, 1 in 3 Australian kids by the age of 5 to 6 have tooth decay in their baby teeth. 40% of kids by the age of 12 to 14 have tooth decay in their adult teeth. So it's quite surprising at how prevalent this disease is.
Surpassing this sugar phenomenon to improve the nation's oral health, especially for young children, is a difficult challenge. Now, heads are turned to the Australian federal government with a popular global solution that may in fact bring about the required change for Australia, the sugar tax.
I think it's something that we do really need to consider here in Australia. One, because it will help to shift consumption, and it helps to educate people. You know, people sort of will ask the question, why is there a tax on this drink? And so it gets them to think about what they're consuming.
And it may just help put a smile on everyone's face. Nick Angus in Melbourne for Newsline.
Now to Laura Green with a roundup of the domestic stories making headlines this evening.
Thanks, Nick. A 17 and an 18-year-old have been charged with the murder of a young man 3 days ago. Police found the body of 18-year-old Alex Ione last Friday when they were called to a house party in Sydney's southwest. A building fire caused the crowd to move into the streets, where fights involving baseball bats broke out between 9 and 10 a.m. Sydney's first driverless trains experienced glitches during their debut yesterday, following the culmination of a 5-year, $7 billion state government project. Trains overshot stops and staff had to open malfunctioning automatic doors at Macquarie Station, causing overcrowding and delays. Dozens of children have been treated with preventative measles vaccinations after coming in contact with an infected child. An outbreak hit Melbourne last week after an overseas traveller brought in the highly infectious disease. At least 22 people have been infected, causing the country's biggest outbreak in over a year. Back to you, Nick and Ruby.
People who have been jailed are at a greater risk of living rough. Studies show housing programs provide short-term support, however the risk of homelessness increases after this ends. Phoebe Humphrey has more.
Like the homeless population, Australia's prison population has increased by 56% in the past decade. The relationship between the two groups is continuing to grow, due to minimal social, economical and cultural capital.
I see that in the form of high rates of mental health problems in both populations, high rates of family separation, high rates of early childhood trauma. So there's a whole range of characteristics which both populations share.
32-year-old Matthew Huppert has seen both sides to unstable housing in prison, having been behind bars twice.
My last sentence was a blessing in disguise for me, like the cycles I was living and the drugs and the people, and I didn't have the willpower to get away from it.
Like many prisoners, Matt looked towards his family for housing support, a luxury that some prisoners do not have access to.
Yeah, it's hard unless they have the family support or they're involved in other structures or routines or whatever, for them not to fall back into the same patterns.
Since 2001, Corrections Services have delivered housing support programs for inmates to help them integrate back into society. Although these programs have been successful, they only provide support for up to 12 weeks, a honeymoon period that soon begins to fade.
Governments constantly do this. They take one step in the right direction but don't go all the way, to fund a program that would last, let's say up to 12 months or something like that.
Offering prisoners family support can reduce reoffending with potential for costs to be saved.
To me, it's a good investment to be putting money into family, because they're the crucial sort of, foundation stone in terms of helping people move out of that sort of high risk phase.
In 2015, 4,500 prisoners were released from Victorian prisons. However, just under 700 were placed in housing support programs. Access to stable accommodation is critical for successful integration into the community.
Assisting families and extending support programs could be the next step for developing new policy intervention.
Somewhere to call home, and that's what everyone needs.
Phoebe Humphrey in Melbourne for Newsline.
An interesting look into prison housing from Phoebe Humphrey there, investigating the link between homelessness and reoffending. Coming up on Newsline, we're taking you live to Parliament House, where the Treasurer has just delivered the state budget. Find out how this will affect you.
We're also taking a look into federal politics and the Prime Minister's historic new cabinet, and sex education in Catholic schools. Are we preparing our students to approach sex in a healthy and inclusive way? This is Newsline. We'll be back shortly.
Welcome back to Newsline, broadcasting live from the studios of RMIT. I'm Nick Tabano.
And I'm Ruby Kens. Today we'll take a look ahead at all the latest from the European election and find out the struggles faced by regional women regarding abortion access. But first, let's move to state politics.
After a month's delay due to the federal election, the Andrews government has today released their state budget. It is State Treasurer Tim Pallas's fifth budget and has been shrouded by a dark cloud hanging over the Victorian property market. What does this mean for you, and how will you be affected? We cross now to Bryn Duggan, who is at State Parliament. Bryn, is Victoria expected to be in the black?
It is expected to be in the black. That's by a figure of about $1 billion this year. That figure in the following year will be 1.5 billion. The year after that, 3.9 billion, and the following year, 4.9 billion in the last year of the budget. This is despite a $5.2 billion windfall to stamp duty revenue, which in the past has been a major earner for the Victorian government.
The Treasurer must have made some serious changes to offset that loss. Where are they making the money?
Yeah, so there has been a number of tax increases. These have come to areas. There's a brand new royalty to be paid by gold miners in Victoria. Also, luxury car buyers, that is luxury cars costing more than $100,000. Aside from that, the property market has taken another hit, with foreign property investors and owners of property that is empty will also be paying a bit more because of this budget.
So, Bryn, things are pretty bleak for the property market.
You could say that, yes, and that has been the narrative for the past couple of years, particularly recently in Victoria. And this budget itself was found on figures from 2018 to 2019, which showed a 15% decrease in property sales.
And who are the big winners?
The big winners, you could say in some ways, Victorians. That's because despite funding cuts in other areas, all budget promises have been found to be funded. They're things such as Solar Victoria, the North East Link, and free kindy for 3-year-olds. Aside from that, the other big winner is the public sector, which has seen funding going towards new jobs for nurses, police, and paramedics.
Was there any infrastructure funding announced?
This seems like it's going to be quite a sticking point as a result of this budget. Big new spending and building initiatives seem to have been put on the back burner. That is despite $2 billion worth of funding for the Sunbury Line rail upgrade.
And Bryn, was it a windfall or a fall? Can we just get clarification on that?
Sorry?
A windfall or a fall in the budget?
A shortfall.
And what can the everyday Victorian take away from the announcement?
The everyday Victorian potentially will suffer a little bit from the budget, but this is also a result of the federal election. Because of that, the Victorian government will be getting $2 billion less funding, which it works out to be about $200 per Victorian per year. That's all I have for you today.
That was reporter Bryn Duggan reporting from Parliament House. Now to other politics news, we go to Catherine Smith for the latest.
Thanks, Nick. In federal politics, Anthony Albanese has been elected the new Labor leader. At least 4 other candidates considered a bid for the position, but none officially put themselves forward when nominations closed at 10 a.m. Richard Marles is expected to step in as deputy leader after Claire O'Neill pulled out of the race. And Prime Minister Scott Morrison has announced his new look cabinet. Western Australian MP Ken Wyatt has made history as the first Indigenous Australian to be appointed as the Indigenous Affairs Minister. The Minister tweeting that he is honoured and will be working and walking together with elders, families and communities. The 22-member cabinet includes a record number of 7 women. This comes after much criticism about the lack of female representation in politics. Barnaby Joyce lost his position as drought envoy, tweeting that he himself only found out when watching the news. Marise Payne was made the new Minister for Women. She says that the safety of women will be a top priority for the federal government in the wake of the tragic killing of Melbourne woman Courtney Heron on the weekend. And that's all for federal politics.
Thanks for that, Catherine. Regional women often struggle to find adequate support when seeking an abortion. Eva Marchingo discusses the election outcome will impact the future provisions of services.
In March, Labor announced that if elected in the 2019 federal election, they would require public hospitals to offer termination services as part of the Commonwealth funding agreement. Opposition spokeswoman for Women, Tanya Plibersek, has said these provisions will help make abortion more attainable and accessible for regional women especially. Federal member for Bendigo, Lisa Chesters, said the promise was an example of how Labor has matured as a party with a strong focus on gender equality. A sexual health promotion officer, Natalie Cavallero, has said regional women face unique restrictions when accessing reproductive services.
The geographical location is one of the biggest barriers, but there's also a lot of invisible barriers. So, living in a rural and regional area, there's perceived to be less privacy. We also know that in rural and regional areas there are different intersections of marginalisation and disadvantage that can occur. It's not very transparent to women and pregnant people what they need to do to get the abortion that they have every right to seek. Nationally, we need a sexual and reproductive health strategy. And so it's fantastic to see federal Labor making that commitment to, not just abortion access, but the wider sexual and reproductive health landscape as well.
The coalition government has made it increasingly clear throughout their election campaign that accessible abortion is not on the agenda, with Prime Minister Scott Morrison saying that it's a divisive issue. With the coalition having survived the 2019 federal election, it's unlikely that any policy regarding accessible abortion will pass. Federal member for Bendigo Lisa Chesters has said that despite her party's loss, Labor will still keep on pursuing progressive women's healthcare. Eva Marchingo, Newsline.
We now cross to Jess Boland for a roundup of the international headlines.
Thanks, Nick. Elections for the European Parliament wrapped up last night, bringing the highest count of voters to date, with 51% of the continent casting their votes. Early estimations suggest the centre-right and centre-left socialist groups will continue to dominate. However, the party has lost a large number of seats to more extremist groups since the last election. The newly elected leaders will meet tomorrow to choose candidates for the Parliament's top jobs. In Britain, the newly formed Brexit Party of Nigel Farage is a big winner from the European election. Farage beat both the ruling Conservatives and the main opposition Labour Party decisively. The pro-EU Liberal Democrat came second in the poll. Australia says it is watching events in Papua New Guinea closely after the resignation of Prime Minister Peter O'Neill. The resignation follows weeks of political turmoil and the departure of key party supporters. It is unclear who is going to replace the PM. Israel's President Reuven Rivlin says he was deeply shocked by a German government official's comment. Germany's anti-Semitism Commissioner Felix Klein was quoted as saying, "I can't recommend Jews wear the skull cap at all times in Germany." The warning comes after a 20% rise in anti-Semitic incidents in Germany. And that's all for international news.
Thanks, Jess. Studies have shown that many Catholic schools are failing their students by not teaching sex education adequately. Myra O'Hagan reports on the issue of faith-based abstinence education.
No sex before marriage is a rule most Catholic schools encourage, but access to sexual health information is a UN right. While some students say they were taught everything they needed to know.
Yeah, I think we were. The sex education was separate to the religious education, which was quite important, I found.
Others were left to figure things out for themselves.
Oh, there was definitely nothing in there. We definitely didn't get really any mention of it at all.
Catholicism dictates abstinence until marriage, meaning some Catholic schools prefer a more conservative approach to sex education. But these methods of teaching are usually based on a heterosexual norm and fail to include information on things like STIs, contraception, or LGBTI relationships.
No, I'm definitely not happy with it. I know for some other high schools they had really good sex education, but for me personally, I feel like it's pretty horrific how bad it's been.
STIs are on the rise in Australia and young people are the biggest contributors, but for most people, abstinence is not a realistic contraception option.
How to be safe with it is really important. I feel like not many people know about how to have safe sex.
Sex education is part of the Australian curriculum, but it is up to schools to decide how much detail to give topics such as consent or gender identity.
I definitely think that it needs to be compulsory for all schools, including religious schools, to have some form of sex education.
Catholic Education Melbourne provides guidelines for Catholic schools, but did not respond to an interview request. Although it may be difficult to find a balance between religious values and sexual health, a positive approach to sex education could make all the difference. Myra O'Hagan, Newsline.
An insightful story there about sex education in Catholic schools. And I know personally from attending an all-girls Catholic school, I think it is really important for young women to have that kind of support so they can make those choices about their bodies.
Very good point that you make, Ruby. It's also a really important point as well for men as well to make those important decisions when they're at the young age and learn that from an adolescence. But we'll leave that thought for just a moment, because coming up after the break, everything you need to know in finance, as well as an inside look into the new HIV self-test kits with Catherine Smith that could change the way the disease is addressed. This is Newsline, and we'll be back shortly. You're watching Newsline, coming to you live from the studios of RMIT. I'm Nick Tabano.
And I'm Ruby Kens. Coming up later in the show, we'll take a look at why electric guitar sales are on the rise. We'll also be joined in the studio by award-winning novelist Jennifer Down, who'll be discussing her new book.
Now for a quick recap of today's headlines. The Victorian state budget has been released and it has been revealed that stamp duty revenue has dropped by $5 billion.
In federal politics, Anthony Albanese has been elected as the new leader of the Labor Party, and the European election is in full swing with the largest turnout in decades.
And a man has appeared in court charged with the murder of 25-year-old Courtney Heron. Now to finance with Jesse Burns.
Yes, thanks Nick. Yeah, well, the Australian dollar fell 0.3% but remained strong, with Scott Morrison's election putting confidence back in the market. The ASX fell 0.5% on the opening to 6,456 points. Overseas markets are looking nominally stronger, with Donald Trump affirming progress with China over the two countries continue to have trade wars. China's offshore yuan remains stable, showing some relief for the country after its currency has been at a 5-month low. The Aussie dollar, well, it's buying 69.3 US cents, 61 euro cents, 54 British pence, and 75 Japanese yen. For all the cryptocurrency enthusiasts out there, well, Bitcoin has soared to the highest level in a year, extending a run that's seen its price more than double. It's climbed to about 8% to its highest in over a year, trading at $8,500. How's that? Over to commodities now. Oil has had its worst week of 2019, with renewed concerns for oil demand and a stubborn crude oil surplus. Oil fell along with everything else, buying $69 US a barrel. Gold is just under $1,300 US an ounce. That's all for now, guys. For finance, back to you.
Thanks for that, Jesse. At-risk Australians can now take advantage of a new HIV self-testing kit. It means people will no longer have to go to a clinic to be tested, as Catherine Smith reports.
While the overall number of HIV cases in Australia is declining, the number of heterosexual people diagnosed with HIV is on the rise. There are 27,000 people living with HIV in Australia. 3,000 of those are unaware they even have it. Richard Keane was diagnosed with HIV at just 19 years of age. He has been living with the disease for 30 years now. But back in 1989, the prognosis wasn't so good.
I was given around about a 5-year life expectancy, and that was really challenging psychologically for someone who's 19, and I was at uni and stuff like that, just starting to set up my life.
In April this year, Australia's first HIV self-test kit was made available for purchase. It's only $25 and takes just 15 minutes. This is a game changer for people living with HIV.
These home testing kits allow people to have the ability to do that within the safety of their own home and their own time.
The product was developed by an Australian company called Atomo Diagnostics. It's designed for people who, for whatever reason, don't want to go into a clinic to be tested for HIV. Max Niggle from Living Positive Victoria is hopeful that the self-test kits will help reduce the prevalence of HIV in Australia.
I think it will improve the barriers to testing that we currently have. It will allow people who don't have the time to go to a clinic or are scared to go to a clinic to be tested by their doctor, especially in rural and regional areas.
The tests are available to order all around Australia on the Atomo website. They include a care card with information on who to contact if you do receive a positive reading. Catherine Smith, reporting in Melbourne for Newsline.
It's time now to cross to Nick Angus, who'll be giving us the latest in arts news.
Thanks, guys. To begin today, the 7 nominees for the 2019 Gold Logie Award have now been revealed to the public. Alongside the TV personalities of Amanda Keller, Waleed Ali and Tom Gleeson, surprise inclusions of The Neighbours star Eve Murray and Gardening Australia's Costa Georgiadis have made the shortlist. Scheduled for June 30th, the annual Logie Awards ceremony will celebrate excellence and outstanding achievement in Australian television. And to the film industry, where 2 films have stamped their prominence in global box office earnings. John Wick 3 has passed $180 million, making it the highest grossing film in its own franchise, whilst Aladdin has earned $86 million in its first 3 days since release. And finally to France, where the 72nd Cannes Film Festival came to its close on Saturday after 12 days of celebration. Dark comedy film Parasite took out the most prestigious Palme d'Or award out of 19 nominated films. The Cannes Film Festival is one of the most distinguished events for the film industry for its role in previewing and awarding films of the year. So I think we can say it has been a big weekend and start to the week for the entertainment industry on a global scale. This has been your Newsline Arts with Nick Angus.
Thanks, Nick. Electric guitar sales are on the rise again. Following the presumed death of rock, sales of classical instruments such as guitars declined. However, the almighty axe is making a comeback. Eddie Lim finds out why.
Rock is dead, or at least that's what everyone said more than a decade ago. After software-based instruments took over the radio airwaves that once belonged to guitar heroes like Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton, it seems a new influx of customers want to reconnect with their rock roots.
In terms of overall numbers, there's definitely less guitar heroes nowadays, but I think the ones that do exist have a much broader or further reach, like guys like Ed Sheeran and John Mayer, and I think there's been a lot of support from companies that are around and have been around since the golden years, the 1950s, that have started to realise the importance of shifting focus and not necessarily, marketing to a niche group, like certain ages, certain genders, etc.
In the past 5 years, electric guitar sales have consecutively increased in the United States, with Australia experiencing similar growth. But what is it about these iconic instruments that make them so popular, even today?
One thing might be a generational thing. Parents are passing their passion onto their children. Another reason may be because of how unique the instrument is. Guitar, it's the way you express yourself on a guitar, you can never imitate that on a synth pad or drum machine.
Fender, one of the giants in the guitar industry, have been successfully increasing their sales by targeting younger audiences in their marketing advertisements.
Guitars are better because you can express your feelings through it, and whatever you play on that's from you, not from a button.
While some prefer the tactility of an organic instrument, others simply love the electric guitar for their one-of-a-kind look.
It's like porn. What more can you want, man? It's like, look at that wall of awesome. It's appealing. They've got classic lines. They just have an aura about them.
Reports have foreseen this positive sales trend to continue all the way past 2022. Eddie Lim in Melbourne for Newsline.
Melbourne buskers will now need to impress judges in private auditions if they want to secure a valued spot in the Bourke Street Mall. Jesse Burns reports.
Melbourne buskers, a common sight for anyone walking through the CBD. But from this month onwards, anyone wanting to perform in the prized Bourke Street Mall will have to take part in a rigorous audition process. While some feel this is too harsh, some Melbourne buskers along the strip think this is a step in the right direction.
Normally when you see street performers, you think, okay, you see people and you don't know their skill level, whether they're good or they're bad. And Bourke Street is meant to be a culmination of the highest quality street acts that there are.
While the city has over 2,000 registered buskers, only 140 will be performers selected to play in the Bourke Street Mall. While this decision from the Melbourne Council hopes to create a better atmosphere around the city of Melbourne, some believe it takes away from the values and history behind busking.
Totally ridiculous, in my opinion. I feel like busking is really about people really showing what they have on the spot. I don't feel like you should have to get in front of any sort of judging panel. It's not Australian Idol.
Clarkson, the once busker, is now deterred due to the latest audition process as it feels more like a competition.
Yeah, I think buskers are there to make money. I think they're there to have a good time, and I think it makes it some sort of strange competitive environment. It gives it a bit of a weird atmosphere, and you're going to just get different people busking. It's not going to be the same kind of old school busker that there has been in the past.
While the premium busking permits at the moment only apply to Bourke Street Mall, the council is suggesting it could go citywide.
Regardless of what the decision may be, anyone travelling through the Bourke Street Mall can continue to expect sounds like this all across the city.
That was Jesse Burns reporting for Newsline. Before we head to a break, Freya Lily is here to chat about what to expect when we return.
Thanks guys. Definitely stick around because after the break I'll be sitting down with award-winning author Jennifer Down to discuss the repercussions of researching trauma for her new novel, Proud Flesh. It should be very interesting. Welcome back to Newsline. I'm Freya Lily. Earlier this year, a former Age crime reporter was awarded $180,000 in damages for post-traumatic stress disorder. In a legal world first, the court was found the newspaper was responsible for her PTSD because it failed to provide a safe workplace. Trauma among journalists is becoming more widely talked about, and for good reason. There's organisations such as the Dart Centre for Journalism and Trauma providing education and the space to talk, which is invaluable in itself. But what kind of support is there for fiction writers? Today I'm joined by award-winning author Jennifer Down, who is in the middle of writing her second novel, Proud Flesh. Thanks for being here, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me.
Now, what's the premise of your book?
So it's essentially about a young woman who grows up in residential and out-of-home care in Australia. As an adult, she's charged with 3 separate counts of infanticide for her own children, and subsequently decides to disappear.
And what kind of research went into writing something like this?
It was pretty extensive, so I was working with quite a long timeline. The book, the narrative sort of starts in the 1970s and runs right through to present day. And so as well as historical research, there was also sort of extensive research into things like perinatal mental health, as I mentioned, infanticide, and sort of some of the I don't know, the different types, I suppose, the things that can sort of precipitate that sort of violence perpetrated on one's own children. And then, of course, research into what it's like to grow up in institutional or state care in Australia.
Yeah, and so that kind of research is obviously not easygoing. Do you find the isolation of being a fiction writer and researching things like this has any repercussions?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it takes a little while to come to terms with it. I thought for a long time that it wasn't that I wasn't sort of sustaining trauma, or that I couldn't because I wasn't involved in direct practice. Of course, this isn't my experience. I'm not a survivor of complex PTSD or anything, and nor am I a social worker or a mental health professional who works with people directly affected every day. And so for a long time, I thought that this sort of wasn't my thing to feel bad about, and the isolation of fiction writing certainly plays into that, because it's a lot harder to sort of navigate some of those ideas, or to you don't have any sounding board a lot of the time because you're working by yourself, so you can't sort of it's a lot harder to find the yardsticks for things if you can't turn to somebody and say, hey, I read this thing earlier this week and it stayed with me. I can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as a journalist especially, we work with people all the time, and perhaps there's a sort of weight to what we do as like a expectation of writing about the things that are happening in the world, because that's our job as journalists. But as a fiction writer, you're working from your imagination. So why write about something so macabre?
I mean, that's a really good question, and I think it's I worry a lot about the point at which something becomes sort of trauma porn or needlessly voyeuristic.
The trauma tourist.
Yeah, being a trauma tourist, exactly. But I think we do have a kind of social responsibility as writers as well to discuss things that might receive a little bit less attention in mainstream media, and certainly for me, the treatment of children. Particularly those living in sort of precarious conditions, and particularly those in out-of-home care, so residential homes or foster care. That's something that mainstream media in Australia has just traditionally ignored, despite numerous government reports being tabled over the years. And so, if I can shine one tiny light on the issue through fiction, it doesn't seem the worst way to do it, I guess.
Yeah, and I think. I know we've spoken earlier about the desensitization of a lot of people in this world at the moment, with constantly being bombarded with horrible news. And so perhaps when someone sits down to read a piece of fiction, the moral of that story can be more slow burning for someone.
Yeah, I think fiction is kind of interesting because we do read it for escapism, and we read to escape the world, but often the things that we read in a book will stay with us for quite a long time, and in quite interesting ways. You can sort of percolate on something, or we metabolize narratives in fiction quite differently, whereas with the 24-hour news cycle where as you say, we're bombarded constantly and we're taking in such a volume of new information, that I think our attention span is almost trained to switch and tick from thing to thing. And so I think that fiction can provide a really nice way of sort of presenting somebody with an issue, not so much as an issue, not in those terms, but just saying here's something that's maybe worth thinking about, and the way that that it kind of reveals itself to each person, as you say, can be a little bit more slow burning.
Yeah, and then do you think, like in comparing your previous two novels, one a collection of short stories, Pulse Points, and her first book, Our Magic Hour, you've never really shied away from heavier topics. You know, suicide, mental health are being big themes in your stories. Do you think this has any more gravity to it in the research that you have done?
This novel?
Yeah.
I think certainly it's been much more extensive research, and so I've sat with the material for much longer, and so for me personally, it's definitely been more challenging, and I've had to take breaks and sort of dip in and out of it a little bit more. And then, as I mentioned before, this isn't quite my world. Nothing I've written has been autobiographical, but this has been quite a departure from anything I've known personally, and so wanting to do justice to that experience and not sort of capitalise on somebody else's trauma has meant that I've really wanted to do as much in-depth research as possible. So yeah, it's certainly, from my perspective, it's been a little bit more challenging.
Do you ever worry about re-traumatisation?
Of others?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's why I've been, very careful with this book to work with first-person testimony, but where it's appeared sort of, say, in government reports or inquests or things like that. So it's survivors telling their stories. That's a lot of what I'm reading, but it's not necessarily me speaking with them directly.
Right. Really interesting stuff, and I look forward to reading the book. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me.
I just want to remind people that if any of the topics discussed today cause distress, you're not alone. There's a wealth of confidential support networks you can contact. Lifeline operates 24 hours, 7 days a week, and can be reached on 131114. Well, it may not be everyone's cup of tea, but designer snake breeding exists and is in high demand. Tamara Clark reports there is more to the serpent than meets the eye. And a warning, the following images could be disturbing.
Lavender albino pythons sell for $40,000. Tibetan mastiffs for $500,000. Pacific bluefin tunas are worth almost $2 million. These are genetically morphed animals heading the designer snake industry. Bred for their skin-deep and regularly shed beauty, from albino, lacking pigment, to xanthic, black and white.
Designer snake breeding is just basically breeding two different morphs, which means genetic mutation, to each other in the hope of producing something that hasn't been seen before, that has cleaner, crisper colours, patterns, designs, something basically that's going to blow people's minds. And that's where the excitement lies in the hobby, is seeing the first of a new kind of morph.
I'll always be passionate about mutation breeding, because it's basically like we're playing God, really. I mean, it's got its pros and its cons, but we're creating new and exciting combinations of animals.
With independent breeders popping up all over the country, you may be wondering, is venomous activity happening behind closed doors, and can this be avoided?
With the Jaguar mutation, even though it made the colours so much more vibrant and crisp and clear, it also comes with a neurological side effect, which people overlook because of how good the patterns and colours are. They see that as an oversight.
A few suggestions that I can give to young and upcoming reptile keepers are to make sure you buy a snake from a reputable breeder. I think too many people fall into a trap where they go onto Facebook and buy a snake from there. I think it's just going to get more popular and more popular.
Who knows what we are yet to create? The industry must slither forward with integrity to find out. Tamara Clark in Melbourne for Newsline.
And that was something a little different. I don't know about you, Nick, but did you see that rat in the corner?
Mate, we talk a lot about the snakes, but that rat was absolutely devoured. It didn't make me feel comfortable at all. Luckily, there was the disclaimer message, because who knows how some people might have felt a little bit squirmish looking at that.
That's it. I know I don't like snakes for one, so I can imagine how all the viewers out there felt.
Absolutely terrified of snakes, not going to lie. But look, we're going to leave that for just a moment, because coming up after the break, we'll hear all the latest with tonight's mid-season draft in sport.
And winter is here. Melbourne has hit a cold snap. Find out more just after this.
You're watching Newsline, broadcasting live from RMIT in Melbourne. Well, it's been an action-packed weekend of sport, and James Cusack is here to fill us in on all the latest.
Thanks, guys. Carlton are set to take West Australian mature age prospect Josh DeLuca with pick 1 in the first AFL mid-season draft tonight. And in breaking news, Geelong forward Gary Ablett has been suspended for 1 week after being charged by the match review panel for striking Gold Coast Anthony Miles. If Ablett accepts the suspension, he'll miss Geelong's game against the Swans on Saturday. The NBA Finals are set as the Toronto Raptors will face the Golden State Warriors in a best-of-7 series starting this Friday. To tennis, Roger Federer has won his first-round match of the French Open in straight sets, 6-2, 6-4, 6-4. It's Federer's first appearance at Roland Garros since 2015. He will face unseeded German Oscar Otte in the second round. The only Australian in action on day one was 19-year-old wildcard recipient Alexei Popyrin, who advanced to the second round, beating Frenchman Hugo Humbert in 4 sets. New South Wales and Queensland have named their 18-man squads for the series opener in Brisbane on June 5th. Blues coach Brad Fittler has named 5 debutants. They include South Sydney's 5'8" Cody Walker, who has been the standout player in the competition so far this season. South Australia and the AIS have welcomed the appointment of Richard Colbeck as Australia's new sports minister. He was appointed by Scott Morrison in the Prime Minister's weekend post-election cabinet reshuffle. And that's it for sport news today. Back to you, Nick, who has an interesting story on the soccer ashes.
Well, James, just before we get to that story, any word on if Gary Ablett will be appealing this suspension?
We'll find out over the next few hours, Nick, if Gary will appeal. He appealed 2 weeks ago after his hit on Dylan Shield and he got off, so he might like his chances at the tribunal tomorrow night again. But who knows? We have to find out in a few hours.
Thanks, James. Well, you may have heard of the Cricket Ashes. However, what if there was another Ashes? A tournament long forgotten in the history of Australian sport. I looked into this matter further. Long before John Aloisi was sending Australia to the World Cup and Tim Cahill was scoring out of this world volleys, the Australian national soccer team has a long storied history. Long forgotten was a tournament known as the Soccer Ashes. The Soccer Ashes took place between 1923 and 1954 between Australia and New Zealand. The two teams competed for a trophy, a small razor case mounted in a casket decorated with a kangaroo and silver fern. The razor case belonged to Private William Fisher, who was among some of the first Australian soldiers to face the Turkish military on Anzac Cove during World War I. Inside the case resides the ashes of cigars which the captains of both sides had smoked at the conclusion of each tourney. However, mysteriously after 31 years of competition, the ashes disappeared without a trace.
It's a really important trophy that seems to have gone missing a long time ago, and there seems to be all of a sudden in the mid-50s a lack of interest in this trophy, which was a very important trophy because it's an artefact that actually, part of the artefact actually was at Gallipoli.
The push to find the ashes is spearheaded by football historian Ian Sison and backed by Football Federation Australia, who believe it is essential to find the ashes and help recognise it as a major part of Australian football history.
They've been missing now since the 1950s, and we sort of join Ian and others in making a call out to, I guess, firstly the football family, but then beyond that, to see if we can find this trophy.
Places such as Football Nation Radio have helped spearhead the find for the case. However, due to the razor case being missing for over 60 years, the chances of finding the original ashes are very scarce. But the idea of potentially starting a new ashes has been thrown up and is still a possibility.
It's going to be a bit hard to ask for a series to be played, but maybe a one-off game once a year. I mean, why not an Anzac Day game?
Nick Tabano, Melbourne, for Newsline.
What a great story there from Nick. Nick, how did you come across that story?
Well, I came across this story actually at Football Nation Radio. I did some research into the Soccer Ashes and spoke to that football historian Ian Sison extensively about it. It's quite an interesting story because obviously soccer in itself doesn't necessarily get the same recognition as what maybe cricket does in terms of the Ashes. So for them to recognise it and help, get a trophy that they're able to celebrate on a yearly basis, it'd be quite an interesting thing, and I thought, well, why not look into this matter a little bit more, considering it's been missing for about 65 years now.
And I believe you're going to be discussing this. Is that right, on the Rush Behind?
No. I'll be talking about the other football on the Rush Behind, Ruby. That's right. Look, close, but not quite there, Ruby.
Oh.
All right, moving on.
In its third season, the AFLW saw 9 players suffer ACL injuries, with 2 incidents in the grand final alone. Anna McGuinness reports on the high risk of injuries facing all female football players at all levels.
Women are 5 times more likely to tear their ACL while playing AFL than men. And that's just one of the many serious injuries that can be sustained while playing the sport. There is little evidence to explain why women are suffering more injuries than men.
Some people would theorise that women have a genetically or an inherently higher risk because of certain biological factors.
Old Camberwell Amateur Football Club has had a women's side for 3 years, and it's the women's teams that generally see more injuries than the men's.
Fortunately this year we haven't had any ACLs, but over the last couple of years we have had probably a higher number of ACLs than we see generally in the guys' footy.
The prospect of finally being able to play football was exciting for women who had been waiting for their chance, but injury was a concern for some players before they joined in.
Yeah, I actually put off playing footy for 2 years because I was scared of injury and then decided to give in. And
there is no doubt that injuries are a part of sport, but with more women and girls taking up AFL, the discussion around the impact of serious injuries will continue. However, researchers will need more time to fully understand why they are happening and how to prevent them. For the time being, clubs can only do what they can to try to prevent serious injuries.
We try and do a few things different from the guys in regards to extensive warm-ups and also spending a lot of time talking about sort of how they land and how they actually brace and take contact, which is probably not something we spend as much time with the guys on.
Despite the risk, women's footy is booming. In 2018, a record third of all AFL participants were female. And although injuries are happening, there are also many benefits to the sport.
But I think that people are really focusing on what's the injury risk, but perhaps not looking at the whole picture and thinking about the benefits as well.
Anna McGuinness in Camberwell for Newsline.
And I believe I might have got a bit ahead of myself there. Nick, you will be discussing this on the Rush Behind later, is that right?
Yeah, we will on Thursday here on Channel 31 at 6:30 p.m. Join us for the Rush Behind. Myself, Athos Sirianos, Chris Neese and Brooke Varney, always going through the weekend's action, what's coming up and also what happened. And always the big topics of what's going on there, Ruby. And I believe you did maybe just step ahead of yourself there talking about the wrong football at the end of the day.
Although I will say this, you know it's a good show when someone who, like me, does not like sport still enjoys it.
Well, at the end of the day, the show is for everybody. And look, let's move on now. And after a cold and wet day in Melbourne, let's cross to Phoebe Humphrey to see what's in store for the rest of the week.
Thanks, guys. In Melbourne today, we had an icy morning with gusty winds leading into afternoon thunderstorms. As showers continued throughout the day, the city reached a max of 13 degrees. Around the country, up north, Darwin was sunny today, reaching a max of 33. In Brisbane, the city reached a top of 27. Sydney was windy with a max of 19, and Canberra windy with showers, 10 degrees. Out west, Perth was sunny, 23. Adelaide reached a top of 16, and Hobart 12 with light showers. For the week, Melbourne will see more rainfall as we head into the start of winter. Tuesday will be cloudy with a few showers in the afternoon, 16 degrees, and Wednesday brings up to 8 millimetres of rainfall with a top of 12. Heavy rainfall continues on Thursday with possible hail in the southeast suburbs, reaching 13, and Friday cloudy with a max of 15 degrees. For the weekend, Saturday is cloudy with light winds and a shower or two, 15 degrees, and Sunday will also bring possible showers, rounding out the week with a top of 16. That's your Newsline weather to the minute. I'm Phoebe Humphrey. Back to you, Nick and Ruby.
Thanks for that, Phoebe. Well, we must thank our special guest who came in a little bit early for a special interview, award-winning novelist Jennifer Down, for that fantastic interview with Freya Lilly.
Definitely, I think it's so important that people do realise those issues because so much of the time they do get really unnoticed.
Exactly right there, Ruby. And look, I believe that comes to the end of our program. Thanks for watching. I'm Nick Tabano.
And I'm Ruby Cairns. Newsline will return tomorrow, afternoon, but for now, goodbye.